Okay, great. Hi, I'm Kathy Velikov.
And I'm Geoffrey Thun. We're both faculty members at the University of Michigan's Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning and partners in the design research practice RVTR. This morning, we're going to give a paper called Rethinking the Delivery of Social Infrastructure, a Systems-Based Methodology and Proposition.
Great. And can everyone see the slide on the screen? Great. Okay. So today we will be presenting a recent project that works on questions of inequality in cities through the lens of access to social infrastructure. In this research, we develop a near real-time mapping interface tool to identify geographies of exclusion and agents of access, and then outline a design methodology to reassemble new social infrastructures embedded in these urban milieus. The urban condition of many US cities is characterized by a drastically uneven development, comprised of large areas of dispossession and marginalization, with highly asymmetrical distribution of urban services and uneven access across neighborhoods. And what is extremely concerning is that this has been getting progressively worse in the past 20 years. According to sociologist Saskia Sassen in her 2014 book, Expulsion, she states that the past 2 decades have seen a sharp growth in the number of people, enterprises, and places expelled from the core economic and social orders of our time. The notion of expulsion takes us beyond the more familiar idea of inequality as a way of capturing the pathologies of today's global capitalism. She adds that expulsions are made. The instruments of this making range from elementary policies to complex institutions, systems, and technologies that require specialized knowledge and intricate organizational formats. Our advanced political economies have created a world where complexity too often tends to produce elementary brutalities. And the book continues to unpack how expulsion implicates networks of systems, institutions, and instruments that operate through the logics of complexity.
The following year, Professor of Public Policy Paul Jargowski published his study called The Architecture of Segregation that revealed how the interacting systems of land use policies and development patterns have been leading to increased segregation by race and class, as well as a concentration and sharp growth of poverty in US cities. The study examined data following 2000 when cities have been ostensibly blooming, and he identified that many of these trends were already well underway before the 2008 financial crash.
What this looks like on the ground are neighborhoods where the only place to get food without taking a bus for miles is a gas station, where shuttered storefronts line the streets, where there is no social infrastructure such as libraries, community centers, or even cafes, and where the public realm is neglected and characterized by abandoned lots and boarded up houses. And what it means in daily life is that people living in these communities not only have a vastly reduced quality of life, they are also far more vulnerable in times of crisis, such as what we're seeing currently during the pandemic, as communities living in concentrated poverty, and especially those in predominantly Black communities, have a much higher risk of complications and death from the coronavirus. During Chicago's deadly heat wave in 1995, over 700 residents died across the primarily Black neighborhood of Lawndale and the primarily Hispanic neighborhood of South Lawndale. And research has argued that most of these deaths could have been prevented had these neighborhoods had sufficient social infrastructure. And as the world faces increased crisis and disasters due to climate change and other factors, this urgency of exclusion and inequality are bound to become even sharper and more deadly.
In our work, we use mapping to tell stories. We develop layered maps, thickened with information at multiple scales to simultaneously describe particular geographies and situate the agents and flows that contribute to the production of that geography. On the screen are shed mappings from a previous project titled Infra-Eco-Logy Urbanism that focused on the Great Lakes megaregion. And one of our primary questions coming out of this particular work was whether we could develop a layered mapping methodology that would be interactive, accessible, and that could dynamically capture the transformation of cities and urban data sets.
So through funding for this project we're showing today, we developed the Urban Access Mapping tool, shown here for the city of Detroit. And the tool dynamically combines and layers data from multiple sources and processes them through a graphic interface. It focuses on access to food, health, learning, and mobility, which we identify as 4 urban rights toward a socially just city. The map data is organized by census tract, and the map interface uses near real-time data scrubbing techniques to combine and layer data from multiple government sources and processes them all through an accessible graphic interface built on top of the Google Maps API. And so here you see the selection of 2 different tracts and how the census data information is displayed. You can also see the disparity between the 2 areas of the city that are geographically close to each other. The map interface allows for the overlays to be toggled on and off or seen simultaneously. This overlay draws on US Department of Agriculture datasets to show food deserts, which are defined as areas with low income combined with low access to healthy food within a half mile. And this overlay shows good quality grocery stores within 5 and 10-minute walking distances, or food sheds. The health overlay shows data on health insurance coverage from the Health Resources and Services Administration, as well as the Index of Medical Underservice. And the learning overlay combines multiple statistics to indicate tiers of learning disadvantage using a data-driven ranking methodology that was developed by the Chicago Public Schools. The mobility overlays show several layers from both government and city transit authority sources, such as the percentage of households with vehicle ownership and the few high-quality transit lines in the city, as well as boarding and alighting data from the city's transit service. And so in our research, we have combined and weighted all of these statistics to define what we call exclusion hotspots, which are shown now in red. And this is areas where there is acute low access to all the categories and residential neighborhoods that are statistically most in need. The tool also uses business and industry classification data sets to map actors. And these are organizations, businesses, institutions, and places who deliver access to food, health, learning, and mobility. The Google Maps satellite interface helps to visualize the urban situation of these actors, and local actors can be leveraged towards future transformation. However, we also know that urban data is often incomplete, out of date, or missing, especially for low-income neighborhoods. So the tool also allows for individuals to contribute actors and information on the map. And in this way, members of the community can participate in the creation of knowledge about which local places and people are important and meaningful to delivering urban access in the neighborhood, and thereby finding a way to democratize data-driven urban design processes.
The tool was developed for the city of Detroit, which we showed in the last animation, as well as for the cities of Chicago and the San Francisco Bay Area. By working across these different municipalities, we aim to develop a platform robust enough to handle different kinds of data and different qualities of data. On the screen are the aggregated hotspots of exclusion for each of these cities. Whereas Kathy mentioned, the data sets for lack of access for food, health, learning, and mobility spatially overlap. And on these maps, the tags identify locations where local need and capacity intersect and where we develop specific design interventions in response to these contexts. These are prototypes for the provision of social infrastructure that can be rapidly and nimbly deployed to stabilize and propel neighborhoods, reinstating them as temporal actors within urban dynamics.
Social infrastructure, a growing body of research undertaken by human geographers, social scientists, and anthropologists makes a convincing case for the need and importance of social infrastructure as an essential component of the inclusive and democratic city. Beyond fulfilling instrumental functions, it is argued that social infrastructures are necessary for addressing and preventing some of the most pressing concerns of contemporary urban life, countering social isolation, neglecting difference, and creating places for all. And sociologist Eric Kleinenberg, who's another quote of whose is on the screen right now, argues that in his book, Places for the People, how social infrastructure can help fight inequality, polarization, and the decline of civil life, that social infrastructure can impact community resilience, mortality, and social stabilization in times of disaster.
Our design response to the provision of social infrastructure is based on the premise that design itself should also harness and operate through the logics of complexity, that it can be a systemic approach comprised of multiple discrete yet interrelated moves, each one itself marshaling a network of institutions, organizations, financial, and legal instruments that can enable urban access within cities.
In many ways, this approach learns from the work of Cedric Price, and especially his Detroit Think Grid and Atom projects, which we researched and published on several years ago. The Think Grid is a design for a public educational institution in Detroit and is conceived as a multi-scalar complex of new and existing elements, pilot projects, and experimental programs and practices that co-opt existing spaces, infrastructures, and institutions of the city through variable durations, variable levels of public engagement, and variable levels of visibility, as the project also involved a layer of programming, collaboration, and adaptation. Price's project proposed that physical urban systems could be repurposed toward alternative urban processes and had the potential to rewrite spatial rules and terms of engagement between citizens, urban spaces, and institutions. In these projects, Price conceived that design would be implemented through an entire kit or mobilized ensemble of designed and non-designed elements at multiple scales. Of equal importance as the major architectural components was the kit of parts of everyday technologies and elements. And this includes everything from buildings to headsets, from mobile food operation units to seating to pencils, as equivalently important actors in the ensemble.
In our project, we develop a series of urban instruments conceived of as a set of playing cards. These assemble a lexicon of lightweight, often technologically enabled, and systemic interventions in urban space. These can be physical, like a bus stop or a playground, or mobile, like a food truck or electric scooter, or ephemeral, like a Wi-Fi mesh network. We use these instrument cards both as tools for iteration in our own design work and for engagement with different participant groups to enable visualization of what could be possible in underserved neighborhoods. Here to recap this process we've been working on so far, we operate in cascading scales from data aggregation and analysis at the city and regional scale to on-the-ground analysis and community engagement towards prototype designs situated in specific places.
And here we'll discuss some of the detailed work and proposals for specific neighborhoods within acutely underserved areas. For example, here in the Jefferson-Chalmers neighborhood in Detroit. The mapping tool helps us identify both the geography of exclusion and the local actors that can be leveraged toward transformation of the neighborhood. And at this point, we move beyond the data and spend time at the sites, kind of ground truthing the information from the mapping process, and then adding or modifying the information so it more closely reflects what we see on the ground. We identify strategic locations where municipally or institutionally owned space, such as parking lot edges or city-owned vacant lots, can serve as physical platforms that can be redesigned to enable access to a broader variety of urban needs through the assemblage of lightweight instruments in new public urban spaces. And if this project were to be implemented, these sites and the actors would be developed through a local stakeholder engagement process.
Instruments for specific sites are chosen based on the study of particular needs of that community, on programs, incentives, and enterprises based in the city who would have interest in the provision of these services, and also based on the already present local actors and agencies that might be mobilized to use and support these instruments in the specific neighborhood. We consider how actors operating in disparate domains can be brought together to collaborate. We investigate what amendments to zoning or other city codes and policies need to be made to facilitate modification of existing spaces, or how might existing city-owned lands be assembled. We explore what funding mechanisms or business enterprise might be locally leveraged to mobilize these changes and to sustain their operation. And then we envision how the urban spaces can be physically redesigned through prototypical lean interventions such as new surfaces or their codification, roofs, and places to sit and gather, in addition to the fixed and itinerant urban instruments. Each prototype thus becomes a multi-use public space that provides access to needs and forms social infrastructure within these neighborhood contexts.
We tested this process out at 16 sites across the cities of Detroit, Chicago, and the San Francisco Bay Area. And the selection of sites varied across each city and community. And so Detroit, a city with very little public transit, but also a proliferation of opened and abandoned sites produced by the city's population shrinkage and a program of abandoned property clearance. And here we located sites in areas that were already active for other reasons, such as near churches, near schools, or strip malls where community members already go to gather and meet their needs.
In Chicago, we prioritize spaces adjacent to high volume transit routes, as the city has a robust public transit network. These infrastructures often produce adjacent areas of underutilized urban space, typically city or transit authority controlled, with whom public-private partnership for increased social infrastructure provision would also improve the quality of the city's public realm. The proposals aim to make these spaces of mobility real social hubs, transforming them from being some of the most welcoming and poorly designed spaces in the city, especially when they're not in the urban core, to become active, safe, and produce a generosity of civic life. In the Bay Area, we prioritized coexistence with existing public spaces, primarily parks and other formal territories, due to the extreme high cost of real estate and aiming to amplify existing capacities for the local community. In some cases, our prototypes were positioned as counter proposals, such as at the plaza of Oakland's Lake Merritt BART station, where the proposed intervention consists primarily of temporary and mobile elements that create a holding pattern on the site while plans for a new station are developed by the city.
And so the project conceives of these prototypes, of these prototypical urban architectures as a kind of acupunctural infrastructure that is intended to operate systemically across the city and make use of mobile and itinerant programs and structures paired with lean urban placemaking strategies to reconceive both the provision of access to needs and the provision of social infrastructure in these cities.
Through another grant, we were also able to expand some of the work in Chicago to explore the apparatus of community organizations that could be mobilized as partners in programming activity at these sites, the sources of funding and enterprise that would be able to provide resources for construction and operations, and the institutions and local programs that could continue to care for and maintain these spaces and structures over time. The drawings developer intended to represent simultaneously the design proposition as a spatial and programmatic matrix. But in addition, as designers interested in complexity and systems thinking, we try to visualize not only the object of design, but what is behind it, what allied network forces and mechanisms could bring it into being, and what can support and sustain its ongoing operation in the city as part of our representation.
And then we also try to visualize how both public space and the various elements of the social infrastructure and local actors could work to shape and produce an emancipatory alternative for urban communities in these cities.
And as we wrap up, we'd like to thank and recognize the support we've received for this work through Ford Motor Company, the U.S. Department of Transportation, University of Michigan, National Science Foundation, and recognize the contribution of our research assistants and collaborators to the work.
And thank you for listening and putting up with the technical difficulties.
Yeah, the disruptions. Thank you.